sometimes like when I do get really mad, like I have this moment of realization. I'm like, oh, here we go. Who I accidentally let out is a mob boss. And then that usually instantly kind of jolts me back to like, okay, I need to like restart this conversation, say something different, take a different action, take a deep breath. Like, what's truly the next step instead of just like jumping all the way forward or jumping all the way back.
Hey there, this is Unburdened by Hope, the podcast that helps you harness your possibility and fuel your purpose. I'm your host, Erin Cummings. Here, we're breaking free from the chains of hope and unlocking the power of inspiration within. Get ready to ignite your soul because we're diving deep into the art of letting go, embracing the unknown, and creating a life unburdened by the limitations of hope. Together, we'll uncover the secrets to finding purpose, fueling our passions, and crafting a vibrant existence that sets our hearts on fire. So, are you ready to burn it down what's no longer serving you and step into a life driven by possibility? Let's dive in, my friends, and unleash our boundless potential.
Oh my God, we're at episode 10. I can't even believe it. I'm kind of loving these. I hope you are enjoying these crazy life stories of mine. It's funny when people talk to me about this podcast. I do get a little weird. It's funny to like have people I know be like, "Oh, I'm listening to your podcast." And I'm kind of like, "Oh my God." Like, okay. And I get a little nervous because, obviously we all have that like, what if they don't like it kind of thing. But I am enjoying hearing you guys like share your funny clips and little sayings. But yeah, I want this podcast to be about making small changes that can create a big impact in your life and like just looking for the what's possible. So with episode 10, this is like a follow-up to the like Debbie Downer story of last week of me not being able to eat at a restaurant. Like I do also realize like how, I get it. Like some of you were like, okay, Erin, like you couldn't go to some bougie restaurant. And I'm like, yeah, but that's what I wanted to do. So I understand that there are harder things in life, but this is my podcast and I'm just trying to find like stories that can relate to the intention that I'm sharing. So I want to do a follow-up to last week's episode where your mantra was not everyone here is a fucking idiot. What I thought would be fun is to talk about like that moment of realization of like who you're being when you have these like kind of fight or flight moments or freeze, right? So I've now just totally blanked on the book, and it'll come to me here in a little bit. But there was a book that we had read for, I think it was for yoga teacher training, or maybe it was just a book we had in the yoga studio. And it was super interesting because at one point in the book, once I remember what it is, I'll make sure we put it in the show notes. But at one part of the book, the author talks about like who the crazy lady in your head, like in the attic is. So her phrase is like, who's the crazy lady in the attic? And what that really means is like, who is the person that like you accidentally, like in your head that you accidentally let out, that like you need to be like, oh, hey, hey, Aunt Sally, like when'd you get here? I've been freaking out. And now just only to realize like, oh, hey girl, it's you. Oh, welcome. I was in the other room and didn't realize you were here kind of situation. So with last week's story and me like getting really mad at this like manager and whoever, and that's kind of my MO. Like I feel like I start out pretty reasonable and go and then when I have that moment of like last week I kind of shared that like when something like this happens, like that kind of makes me feel like I'm kind of like not good enough for whether it's like my friends or the relationship, because I can't bring to the table like what this other person might want, even though it might be as simple as a food allergy. But it's kind of like it makes me feel excluded. And no one wants to feel excluded. And it's something that I can't necessarily just be like, well, sure, I'll just change my outfit and my stomach will all of a sudden be able to like process dairy. Like, ain't gonna happen, girlfriend. So, it's something that does make me feel excluded, especially when I'm actually excluded. So I get a little feisty. But a few years ago, I had done an exercise. It was with my mentor, but it was also like one of those things. I think it was like during some sort of training that I was doing where I kind of had realized like, oh, in yoga, in a yoga training I had done previously, they like to use this phrase called like your default way of being. And I don't know how I feel about that phrase. I feel like it's very jargony. If I said that to a random Joe Schmo on the street, like, if Steve heard me say that, Steve would be like, my default way of being, like, what the hell is that? Like, I don't know. I don't know. And really, like, to translate it, it's just kind of like, how do you just like show up in these situations? Like, what are the normal actions that you would take? What's the normal feelings that you would feel? That kind of thing. And without like you just doing it without thinking about it, basically. So I had realized in this kind of fight or flight response that we all have, once you get to that point of like, oh, you're like your adrenal glands have kicked in, and now it's like fight or flight. What do you choose? Well, shocking. Everyone probably knows that I choose to fight. What a shocker. This is brand new information. Yeah, not really. Majority of the time, in most instances, the default, my like subconscious just goes straight to fight. And what a cool exercise I did a while ago was I kind of created like these little personas, so to speak, for my I made one since I typically do fight. I made one for fight. So it's like kind of like not good and bad, like, right shoulder, left shoulder person that sits on your shoulders and like, oh, you need to do this good thing, you need to do this bad thing. But what I had put on my shoulders was like the fight response. And then what I called the jump and like the jump response, the leap response. So I feel like in my body, in my life, in my personality, the first instance for me, if you just think about an action, is to jump. And whether you're jumping into the fight or you're jumping into courage or you're jumping into freedom or whatever word you want to use, like that to me is the first action, is like a jump forward. To have the courage to do something like that jump is courage. But it's like, what is, like, sometimes I don't know what I'm jumping into. And that is what I try and figure out. So I have this like jumping on my shoulders, and it's like, well, who's doing the jumping? And that's what I've been trying to figure out. And that's what I figured out a few years ago. And I gave my little jump people personas. And I think that that's really cool. So I kind of, in order to do this, I wrote down, like, whether you want to meditate, write down, journal, draw, I don't know, interpretive dance it. I kind of figured out, like, if you talk about default, it's like, well, when I'm really pissed off, what do I do? Like, what is my instinctual go-to pissed off thing that like I automatically do? And what I realized was like, when I will get to this point in my head of like, yeah, we talked about it last week, like everyone's a fucking idiot. And then I just go straight to like, fuck you, fuck off, like fuck him, fuck this place, fuck your grandma. And then I'm like, whoa, Erin, like you just like, you can't bring the grandma into this. And then I have this moment of like, oh shit, Erin, the mob boss is here. So, I don't know if I believe that like I have a past life, but I like to think if I did, like, I think I would have been a mob boss in a past life. Like, at some point, I was giving people orders to do, like, I didn't do it myself. But I was giving people orders. Like, I was mad. I was in charge and I was giving people orders to, like, fuck off, fuck you, fuck this, fuck grandma. And then it's like, whoa, okay, you need to go sit over there now. So yeah, I have this like kind of intense, like when I get really mad, I have this like intensity to just like have the mob boss show up where it's very, everything gets very cutthroat. There's no gray areas. It's very black and white. Like, this is, welcome to my daughter's wedding kind of thing. And like, you're not getting past me. And I will dig my heels down so hard and I will do whatever it takes to like be big and you be small. So like, that is instant fight Erin, in my opinion. And if you know me, you might be like, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. But you need like the, oh my God, if I was like that all the time, it would be so scary. So you need like the opposite of that. And that is the Erin that like is like, how can I help others, willing to help, understanding, empathy, compassion. Like, who is that person? And that person jumps into like action of like leadership, accountability, like I said earlier, empathy, understanding, hopefulness, and a sense of calmness, like jumping into like, I've got this, I'm calm, I'm not offended, I'm not triggered, like I'm grounded. And it's like this kind of, I see it as like this very fluid like way of like my emotions and my actions, and it all just works and it's not rigid like the other guy. And so like I said, I really worked through this and I looked at like ways in which I showed up. Like, okay, mob boss Erin does all of these things. Well, what is like this Erin do? And I think too, like, it's not necessarily like the episode I talked about, like just being future you. I think this Erin plays a huge role in that because future Erin doesn't want to be mob boss, but there are some instances in which like you have to fight. Like, there are some instances which you need that like mob boss mentality, like I do in my life. Like, being a leader and like that needs to come out when I set a boundary and like you've crossed it. And like I need that Erin in my life too, but it's just like, who did I accidentally let out of the attic at the wrong time? And that's what's important. So I have my boss Erin, who I've talked a lot about, and then who I see as this other leapful Erin is her name is Odette. She's the ballerina from Swan Lake. If you're into ballet or into Swan Lake, you know who I'm talking about. If you don't, then like it's no big deal. But I danced when I was younger, was always super obsessed with Swan Lake, and she was like, obviously, or not, I shouldn't say obviously, because if you don't know, like you don't know, but this big time character in this ballet. And it was like effortless leaps of courage and fighting. And it's kind of this like as normal dark fairy tale story. But in the actual ballet, there's all of these like leaps and changes. And there's this one scene where it's actually 4 swans, and they're all connected with their arms, and they have to dance this like very meticulous footwork dance. And when you look at it, it looks like one of those things that's like, oh, I could totally do that. And then you go to do it, which I did because I learned the dance, because I danced the dance when I was in ballet. I didn't actually perform that 4-person scene, but obviously like all of us were so obsessed with it. We all learned it. And it was so challenging and so hard because it takes so much practice and so much teamwork and so much awareness of like what the person on your right and on your left is doing. But that is what made me think of this other Erin who leaps into like conscious, courageous decisions. It's like I'm aware of what's going on, and I've done all this work and all this practice to make these decisions. And so there's Swan Lake, White Swan ballerina Erin, and then you have mob boss Erin on the other side. And so, you know, when I have these like moments, it's like, oh, there she is. And so in the instance I talked about last week, you know, the moment I'm like telling Kyle, like, oh, he can fuck off and eat shit and, you know, fuck him and his grandmother. And then I'm like, oh, whoa, like, oh, let the mob boss out. Like, let's rein this in, shall we? And how can I think the easiest way to shift back to, it's just shifting back to neutral. I think that's the other thing too, that like, where I talked about last week, it's not stepping forward, stepping back. It's stepping over to the side. It's coming back to center, as we would say in yoga, shifting back to neutral. Like, how can I get out of the mob boss mentality and just come back to myself? Because you don't want whiplash going all the way over to the other side. And you need both things on your shoulder. Like, you need to be able to transition when you do have something come up that's like, okay, I'm helping way too many people and I'm way over focused on my ballerina side, and I need to come back to neutral too. And so I think like learning these quote unquote default personas, or having these little, you know, characters that you can give yourself as you realize like, oh, when I'm helping everyone else, who am I when I'm being the rescuer? Who am I when I'm being the victim? Who am I when I'm being the prosecutor, the judger? And I think like having those little personas in your head, like thinking about them, you can really realize like when they show up in your life even more. And so now it's not funny, but sometimes like when I do get really mad, like I have this moment of realization. I'm like, oh, here we go. You know, who I accidentally let out as mob boss. And then that usually instantly kind of jolts me back to like, okay, I need to like, this is how I feel. And like I've said before, notice how you feel. Now what's the next step? It's like, okay, I've gone too far. Where can I rein myself in and like restart this conversation, say something different, take a different action, take a deep breath, like what's truly the next step, instead of just like jumping all the way forward or jumping all the way back. So if this conversation this week, I don't know, if it kind of like sparked an idea, or if you've ever thought about any of like kind of how you react, if you've ever thought about it in this way, I'd love to hear like who your personas are. Like, who do you accidentally let out of the attic? Like, is it a crazy, like, I don't know, you know, a crazy bag lady? Like, is it like, I don't know, like, you know, do you become like superhero of, you know, paper towels? Like, I have no idea, but it's got to be something. And I would love to hear like who you come up with and who you're accidentally letting out sometimes. But you can message me. All that information is in the show notes. But it's just a fun way to realize like how you show up in that drama triangle in life. And yeah, I'd love to hear it. So don't forget, as you're moving through the week, like be courageous, capable, and strong as you shift from one persona to the next. And remember, it's coming back to being neutral and not like pushing yourself to each corner of the triangle. So I will check you guys next week. Let me know if you need anything, and I will chat with you soon.
Thanks for listening to Unburdened by Hope. Go to your favorite podcast app, hit that subscribe button, and leave us a review. If you got something out of our show, I'd love to hear from you. Send me your favorite takeaway or any questions you may have to info@erincummings.com. You might even just hear the answer in a future episode. Remember, you are capable, you are courageous, and it's up to you to create what's possible.